The third person is no longer in the picture. What your soulmate finally confessed changed everything. My beloved child. The silence that surrounded your soulmate was never empty, it was hiding a decision that changed everything. Someone who once stood between your hearts is no longer part of the story, but the reason they disappeared has remained locked away until now. Your soulmate has carried this truth like a weight that grew heavier with every passing day, afraid that if they revealed it too soon, you would never believe what really happened. There were conversations you never heard, tears no one witnessed, and one final moment that forced them to choose between a familiar past and the future they secretly wanted with you. But here is the question that has echoed through their mind ever since: would you still listen after everything that was left unsaid? Don't skip, because the next piece of this story changes the meaning of everything you thought you knew. What they are finally ready to confess was never about losing someone else, it was about realizing who they could never afford to lose. For a long time, your soulmate convinced themselves that keeping quiet would protect everyone involved. They smiled when they were expected to smile, answered questions with half-truths, and pretended that nothing inside them had changed. Yet every time your name crossed their mind, the walls they had carefully built began to crack. The third person didn't leave because of a dramatic argument or a sudden betrayal. They faded from the picture because your soulmate finally saw something they had refused to admit before. They recognized that every choice they made while trying to please someone else only pushed them further away from the life they truly wanted. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It came through small moments, unexpected memories, and quiet nights when they couldn't escape their own thoughts. Stay till the end, because the confession you're about to hear wasn't spoken in confidence. It was pulled from the deepest part of a heart that could no longer hide behind fear. Then came the moment no one expected. Standing alone with nothing left to distract them, your soulmate whispered words they had never been brave enough to say aloud. I was never fighting for the wrong person. I was fighting against my own fear. In that instant, everything became painfully clear. The third person had only been a chapter they refused to close, while you had quietly remained the ending their heart kept returning to. But even after this life-changing realization, one final obstacle remained. They know that walking toward you means explaining every silence, every misunderstanding, and every moment that made you question where you truly stood. They are preparing to reveal one last hidden truth, a truth so unexpected that it could erase every doubt, or change the future of this connection forever. Something huge is waiting for you, because what they confess next is the one secret they have never shared with anyone. The confession did not end there. In many ways, it had only just begun. After admitting that fear had controlled every important decision, your soulmate realized there was another truth they had hidden even from themselves. They had blamed timing, distance, and complicated circumstances, but none of those were the real reason they stayed silent. The truth was far more personal. They were terrified that if they reached out after everything that had happened, you would look at them with disappointment instead of understanding. Every unread message they never sent, every late-night conversation they rehearsed in their mind, and every opportunity they allowed to slip away became reminders of the chance they almost lost forever. Yet something unexpected happened recently that shook them to their core. A simple conversation made them realize they were running out of excuses, and for the first time, they stopped asking whether they were ready and started asking whether they were already too late. Stay with this story, because the answer to that question changes everything. That single realization pushed them toward a decision they had avoided for far too long. They began revisiting memories they once tried to ignore, only to discover that every meaningful moment somehow led back to you. The laughter they couldn't replace. The conversations that still echoed in quiet moments. Even the dreams they imagined for the future carried pieces of someone they had been trying so hard to forget, but never truly could. The third person had disappeared from their life, yet the emotional space they left behind was never filled by absence. Instead, it slowly revealed who had been occupying your soulmate's heart all along. That discovery brought relief, but it also brought guilt. They finally understood how many chances had been wasted because they were too afraid to speak honestly. Don't look away now, because the next step they took wasn't planned, it happened in a single emotional moment that no one saw coming. Late one evening, your soulmate made a promise they never imagined they would make. No more pretending. No more hiding behind uncertainty. They decided that if this connection still had even the smallest spark left, they would risk everything to protect it. But just as they gathered the courage to move forward, an unexpected piece of information reached them, something connected to you that completely changed their next decision. It wasn't bad news, but it forced them to pause once again and question whether revealing the entire truth now would heal old wounds, or reopen them. What they discovered in that moment is the one detail they have been carrying ever since, and once it is finally revealed, nothing between you and your soulmate will ever feel the same again. The next morning brought a silence unlike any your soulmate had experienced before. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore, it was the silence that comes after a difficult decision has finally been made. They held that new piece of information close, replaying it over and over, wondering whether it was a sign to move forward or one final warning to stay away. But the more they reflected, the clearer one truth became: hiding would only create another chapter filled with regret. Every road they had taken without you had led them back to the same place, a heart still searching for the person it had never truly let go of. What surprised them most was not how deeply they still cared, but how obvious it suddenly became. Stay till the end, because the next choice they made revealed something they had been protecting for far longer than anyone realized. Instead of rushing toward you with emotional promises, your soulmate chose something far more difficult: complete honesty. They began replaying every misunderstanding, every delayed response, every moment that may have convinced you they no longer cared. One by one, they saw how fear had disguised itself as distance, and how silence had been mistaken for indifference. That realization hurt more than they expected because they finally understood that you weren't waiting for perfect words. You were waiting for the truth. They even admitted to themselves that the third person had become an excuse to avoid facing their own emotions. Once that chapter closed, there was nowhere left to hide. Don't skip this moment, because what happened next wasn't planned. It unfolded naturally, almost as if everything had been leading to this exact point from the very beginning. Then came the confession they never thought they would have the courage to make. Looking back at everything that had happened, your soulmate finally whispered, "I wasn't afraid of loving you. I was afraid that I had already lost the chance." Those words carried years of uncertainty, guilt, and hope all at once. Yet just as they prepared to take the next step, one final mystery surfaced. They learned that someone had quietly influenced the story from the shadows. Not by keeping the third person involved, but by allowing misunderstandings to grow without ever correcting them. Suddenly, the pieces that never seemed to fit began falling into place. But who was this silent influence, and why did they never reveal the truth sooner? The answer to that question is about to uncover the final layer of this story, and it may completely change the way you see everything that came before. A single forgotten detail suddenly refused to stay buried. Your soulmate began connecting conversations that once seemed meaningless, remembering subtle comments, unusual reactions, and moments when someone always seemed to know just enough to create another misunderstanding. None of it had felt important at the time. But now, with the third person completely out of the picture, those scattered memories formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. They realized the greatest obstacle had never been another relationship, it had been unspoken assumptions and unanswered questions. Every time they hesitated, someone else's silence quietly filled the space where honesty should have been. Something huge is waiting for you, because once this realization settled in, your soulmate stopped searching for someone to blame and started searching for the courage to make things right. That decision changed the way they looked at every memory involving you. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, they began noticing all the moments when the connection had quietly survived despite every obstacle. They remembered how certain words from you stayed with them for days, how a single shared moment carried more peace than months spent chasing certainty elsewhere, and how every attempt to move forward without you somehow felt incomplete. For the first time, they admitted something they had never allowed themselves to believe: their heart had never truly changed direction. It had only been delayed by fear and confusion. Stay with this story, because the next discovery wasn't hidden in a message or a conversation, it came from a realization so personal that it brought tears they could no longer hold back. Standing alone, your soulmate finally accepted that the future they kept imagining always had one constant: you. They could no longer pretend that destiny had simply pulled people apart. They knew they had played a role in the distance, and they were ready to face the consequences of that truth. But just as they gathered the strength to close every remaining chapter of the past, they uncovered one final piece that had been overlooked from the very beginning. It wasn't a secret about the third person. It wasn't another misunderstanding. It was something you once did. Something so quiet and selfless that your soulmate never fully understood its meaning until now. The moment they realized what that act truly represented, everything inside them changed, and they knew there was one final confession they could no longer keep hidden. They couldn't stop thinking about that quiet act of kindness. It had seemed so ordinary when it happened that they almost overlooked it completely. But now, after everything had unraveled, they understood its true meaning. You had expected nothing in return. There were no conditions, no hidden motives, no attempt to prove a point. You simply showed patience when they offered uncertainty and understanding when they struggled to understand themselves. That realization broke through every defense they had built over the years. For the first time, your soulmate admitted that genuine love had never been the loudest voice in their life, it had always been the calmest one. Don't skip this moment, because the next truth they uncovered explained why they could never completely walk away, no matter how hard they tried. As the days passed, they began writing down everything they wished they had said long ago. At first, the words came slowly. Then they poured out faster than they could keep up. Every page carried another forgotten memory, another apology left unspoken, another dream they had buried beneath fear. They finally accepted that the third person had not stolen their future. Fear had. Pride had. Silence had. And those were battles only they could end. The more honest they became with themselves, the lighter they felt, as though years of emotional weight were finally lifting. Yet one sentence kept appearing again and again, no matter how many times they tried to rewrite it: if I have one chance left, I won't waste it. Stay till the end, because that promise led them toward a decision they could no longer postpone. Everything changed on the day they decided to stop rehearsing conversations in their mind and prepare for a real one instead. There would be no perfect timing, no flawless explanation, and no guarantee of the outcome. They finally understood that honesty required courage, not certainty. With a steady breath, your soulmate gathered every unfinished feeling, every hidden confession, and every unanswered question into one final message they were determined to share. But just before that moment arrived, they discovered something that made them pause one last time. It wasn't another obstacle standing in the way. It was a surprising truth about your own journey that made them wonder whether your heart had also been quietly changing while they were finding the courage to change theirs. That realization became the final piece of the story, and once it is revealed, nothing between you will ever feel the same again. Everything shifted the moment your soulmate realized this story had never been about reaching you first, it was about reaching you truthfully. They no longer wanted to impress you with perfect words or dramatic promises. They wanted to stand before you without excuses, without pretending they had all the answers, and without hiding behind the mistakes of the past. The fear that once kept them frozen had begun to lose its grip because they finally understood something powerful. Honesty might not guarantee the outcome they hoped for, but silence would guarantee the outcome they feared. That single realization gave them the courage they had been searching for all along. Something huge is waiting for you, because the next discovery convinced them that the connection between you had never completely disappeared, it had simply been waiting for the right moment to breathe again. The closer they came to sharing everything, the more unexpected signs began appearing around them. Familiar places suddenly reminded them of forgotten conversations. Ordinary moments carried extraordinary meaning. Even the smallest memories seemed to whisper the same message: stop looking backward and start telling the truth. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they felt strangely peaceful. They no longer saw the third person as a chapter that needed to be explained. That chapter had already ended. What mattered now was the future they still had the chance to create. They quietly admitted to themselves that if they walked away one more time without speaking from the heart, they would carry that regret for years. Stay with this story, because the words they prepared next were unlike anything they had ever allowed themselves to say before. Finally, your soulmate looked within and accepted the one truth they could no longer deny. I don't want another beginning with someone else, they confessed. I want the chance to finish the story I was too afraid to protect. Those words weren't spoken to erase the past, they were spoken because the past had finally taught them what truly mattered. Yet just as they were ready to reveal every hidden feeling, one final surprise emerged. They discovered that your own quiet strength, patience, and resilience had inspired a change in them long before they even realized it. Suddenly, everything made sense. The third person was never the ending of this story, they were only the detour that forced your soulmate to discover the truth hidden in their own heart. But one final confession still remains, and it is the one message they have been waiting for the perfect moment to share with you. They stood at the edge of the moment they had imagined countless times, yet it felt completely different now. There was no script to follow, no carefully rehearsed explanation, and no certainty about how their words would be received. All that remained was the truth. Your soulmate finally understood that love is not measured by how perfectly someone speaks, but by how honestly they are willing to stand when everything else has fallen away. Every unanswered question, every sleepless night, and every painful lesson had led them here. They no longer wanted to hide behind what had happened yesterday. They wanted to be remembered for what they chose today. Don't skip this final stretch, because the confession they are about to make carries the answer they have been protecting from the very beginning. With a calm heart, they gathered every emotion that had once felt impossible to express. They admitted that letting the third person go was not the hardest part. The hardest part was accepting that they had almost allowed fear to take you out of the picture as well. They confessed that every attempt to move forward without acknowledging their true feelings had only left them feeling emptier. They no longer wished to blame circumstances, timing, or anyone else. For the first time, they accepted full responsibility for the distance that had grown between you. That honesty didn't make them feel weaker, it gave them a freedom they had never experienced before. Stay till the end, because one final truth remained hidden beneath everything they had already revealed, and it would explain why your name had never truly left their heart. Then, with nothing left to conceal, your soulmate whispered the words they had carried in silence for far too long: "The greatest mistake I ever made was believing I had more time." In that instant, every wall they had built around their heart came down. They understood that life had given them one more opportunity, not to rewrite the past, but to choose differently from this moment forward. The third person was no longer part of the story because they had finally accepted that the place they were trying to protect had always belonged to you. Their final confession wasn't about regret alone. It was about hope. Hope that honesty could heal what silence had broken. Hope that courage could replace fear. And hope that when the next chapter finally begins, it will no longer be written with uncertainty, but with the truth they have waited so long to share.